Thanks for watching today's Russian Fazbear Let's Talk video. But before we get into it, I must ask, are you ever on the internet trying to find a fan to buy, or perhaps a video game? Something that you want to buy. It could be on Amazon, eBay, or any other equivalent website. But then, something happens. You have to put in information, and then your unencrypted data could get harvested by hackers! Well, good thing today's sponsor is ExpressVPN. No, it's not. Just kidding. I'm not actually sponsored by anybody. I am completely independent, unlike Cinemassacre is currently. So, last time we left off talking about the history of the angry video game nerd, as well as the gradual decline that he has gone through over the last few years, eventually leading to the creation of a subreddit called the Cinemassacre Truth, which primarily first popped up due to the fact that anyone who criticized Cinemassacre or James's recent work on the official Cinemassacre subreddit would get banned or their posts would get deleted. So this new one was created so that people could openly discuss it without being censored. So it was created, and people there were able to share and articulate their feelings with the current state of the show. And a lot of it is mean humor. A lot of it makes fun of James and these Screenwave people. One thing I didn't bring up to this point is that these Screenwave people, particularly Justin Silverman and Kieran Fallon, who are kind of the main two, they're both rather overweight and a little slobbish looking, you could say, as there are many insulting nicknames that the Reddit community has given these individuals, as well as a few others, such as Tony, who I mentioned before, and Ryan, who's the CEO of Screenwave. They call them things such as the slobs, or slobwave, or sweatwave, or other such insults. And again, these guys are all rather overweight, so it kind of lends itself to it. Of course, I'm not saying it's their fault, but it made these jokes kind of come a bit easier, if you know what I mean. Now, for the most part, these guys didn't really acknowledge the Cinemassacre Truth outwardly. Kieran would oftentimes talk negatively about it on his own streaming channel, but most of them would kind of steer clear of it. Definitely James would. Up until a certain point, however. So, the Cinemassacre Truth, they would make a lot of mean jokes, yes, but really they would also document all of these controversies and issues and decline in quality going on with the Cinemassacre YouTube channel. Any controversy that Cinemassacre has found itself in throughout the years is documented on this Reddit, and as a resource map, they very much know what they're doing and have like all their ducks in a row, you could say. But like I said, there is a lot of mean humor to be found there, a lot of immature attacks, which, if you really think about it, that isn't even too far outside of the spirit of Angry Video Game Nerd, as, like, how do you think a game developer, like, say there was a game developer who worked really hard on this NES game, and then you find 20 years later that some, like, guy playing a goofy character is ripping it to shreds and, like, talking about how much he hates it through cursing and tons of scatological humor. You know, it's kind of a similar thing here, where, you know, James might be insulted by these people saying, like, oh, James's recent videos suck, I'd rather have a buffalo take a diarrhea dump in my ear than watch his new videos, you know, a quote from the AVGN theme song. Something to that effect. So it's kind of like a ripple effect in a sense. So anyways, moving forward into the 2020s, James Rolfe decided to start a band by the name of Rex Viper. And this is when things really started to crumble and fall apart, as it's a band that does mashups of 80s songs as well as video game music. And one of the Screenwave guys, Justin Silverman, was in the band as a backup singer of sorts, and it was really weird. Over COVID, they released a bunch of music videos, and since then, every year at the Too Many Games convention, which is owned by Screenwave, probably the only reason they can get gigs there consistently, Rex Viper will play a concert, playing many of their different songs. So that was James trying his foot really in a profession that he really hadn't done before, and it kind of showed that he never really, he didn't really practice it that much. Now, going forward from that, there was also the plagiarism scandal in October of 2021. I mentioned in part 1 that James had a series called Monster Madness for a while, which was you had 31 reviews throughout the 31 days of October reviewing horror movies that James ended up canceling back in 2016 because he didn't have time to do it. Something James always has lamented about for years now is that he doesn't have time to do anything, and as a result, that's become a big meme/joke on the Cinemassacre Truth subreddit. Just, I don't have time to do anything. He would talk about it all the time. But anyway, so in 2021, Cinemassacre had revived Monster Madness in its classic format with 31 short reviews across the 31 days of October. However, the first review released on October 1st was found to have several sentences directly lifted from another online article, and it was found out that another Screenwave person by the name of Newt, who had written the script for that episode, had plagiarized it, as well as about 20-some others. Every single one of them was plagiarized, so they had to go through, clean up the plagiarism, and somehow they made it happen, but nevertheless it was rather embarrassing for Cinemassacre and Screenwave in general that they let something like that slip by. And moreover, it was just another example of the fact that James is not involving himself in his videos anymore. He's not editing them anymore, he's not writing the scripts or playing the games anymore, and he's not doing that not only for Angry Video Game Nerd, but his other projects too. Such as Monster Madness there with that plagiarism example. So, with all of this happening, and something else that happened in 2021, this was actually before the plagiarism scandal, this was August of 2021, James uploaded a video talking about his current process for how he makes Angry Video Game Nerd videos, which, how Screenwave let him upload that video without having him either just delete it entirely or fundamentally re-edit it, I have no idea. But what happened was, James uploaded a video giving a tour of his current nerd room, talking about his current process for filming AVGN videos, and he even addresses a few complaints of the asshole-ish variety, as he calls it, which is basically just pseudo-talk for, I'm going to address the Cinemassacre truth, which, considering that James had never really addressed criticism before, it was very interesting to see, and he really just kind of dismissed them nonsensically, like saying like, oh, you guys don't like Screenwave? Oh, well, you didn't like it back when I worked with Screw Attack either. And it's like, what? No, like, no one thought that. Maybe like 2 people did, but not like 2,000 compared to how it is now, probably more than 2,000. So he was very dismissive towards the complaints of the Cinemassacre truth, and that could be because it was hard for him to see the difference between genuine critiques of his current work and people just mindlessly making fun of him. That may have been where it stemmed from. But anyways, with his current nerd room setup, he went through the process and there were so many logical holes, such as the infamous example that James, in order to clear floor space, would tape lights and tripods to the ceiling, or not tape, he would zip tie them. He would zip tie lights and tripods to the ceiling in order to have more floor space in his nerd room, and so he has a controlled environment where everything is set up and everything's ready. He doesn't have to set up lights, set up tripods, all that stuff, and make sure that, everything's ready to go so that he can shoot AVGN episodes as quickly as possible. The issue, of course, with this, however, is if everything's completely static, you can only ever get one single shot of yourself, and as I mentioned back in part 1, one thing that made AVGN episodes so compelling is that they were sometimes very faux, they were kind of faux cinematic, which included a bunch of different camera angles and practical effects. And if James has his camera setup super static, that means there is no possibilities for dynamic shots, as you have to move everything in order to get different shots or anything to that effect. And in order to create practical effects too, that just takes up time that James doesn't have. As established earlier, he doesn't have time for anything anymore. And Screenwave could create practical effects, but no, they'd rather just create digital effects and crappy green screen stuff and just have James neurotically stumble around in front of a green screen or something to that effect. So the bottom line is that James, he made a fool of himself in this video, And it really made a lot of people turn their heads and realize that, wow, despite the fact that James was a pioneer of the video making industry on the internet back in the day, in current day, like, he really just, there's something amiss in his mind. Like, he has some screws loose, or maybe even missing entirely. And this led to a couple of other YouTubers making little careers off of bashing James Rolfe. Enter Red Cow Entertainment. So Red Cow Entertainment, they are a YouTube channel based out of Massachusetts, and it's a group of guys who get around and review boxed macaroni and cheese. Now, two of the guys, named Frankie and EJ from that channel, have a side channel where they have a podcast where they just talk about whatever's on their mind. Now, these guys, when shooting their boxed macaroni and cheese reviews, or box mac as they call them, they have to set up tripods, lights, they have to, have scripts ready, be ready to act, all that stuff. So, as a result of that, they're pretty knowledgeable in the world of film. Or, in the world of, like, setting up, shooting film, all that stuff. So, having seen James Rolfe's video, and both having been inspired by James Rolfe, they, one day on their podcast, decided to talk about how bizarre this filming setup James has, and just basically tear James a new one. They tore James a new asshole on how inefficient and just completely backwards his film setup was. And this gained them popularity and a lot of notoriety. There were a lot of people reaching out to them saying, like, oh, like, I agree with you guys, it's like, it's pretty nuts. And of course, these guys being experts in their craft, they, much easier than your average Joe, were able to call BS on a lot of James's inefficient film setups. Another example would be when he cut this piece of wood in half or something just to get a perfect medium shot of himself sitting on the futon, or when he didn't troubleshoot that a 200-foot-long Thunderbolt cable failed and wasted months of his time, restoring data that, again, the data wasn't even corrupted. It was just the Thunderbolt cable failed, so So these guys gained quite a bit of popularity and traction due to basically just articulating in a rather professional manner how James Rolfe has just kind of gone downhill. And it's gotten to the point where nowadays they make a video on their podcast channel pretty much any time there's any sort of angry video game nerd news. Like, they made a video talking about the plagiarism scandal. They made a video talking about episode 200, which it was an interesting thing. It was the 200th episode of the Angry Video Game Nerd, and it was just kind of a long slog, And then there's other events later on that they would make videos about as well. Another YouTuber that I'll talk about briefly, Dancing with Ghosts. The name of the YouTube channel is Dancing with Ghosts. It's hosted by a guy named Josh Cannon, who is the head member of the band Dancing with Ghosts. He's made a few videos critiquing James's band, Rex Viper, which I mentioned earlier, as since he has a band, he is fairly knowledgeable in the world of music. So similar to how the Red Cow Arcade guys are able to critique James's filming setup, Josh from Dancing with Ghosts is able to easily critique James's inability to perform a concert well, him and his band. So with this, he was able to gain quite a bit of popularity and traction as well, as he made a video talking about how bad their music videos were, and I think he's made a video critiquing every one of their live performances thus far. So, and he's made a couple other Angry Video Game Nerd related videos as well, I believe. And these videos have performed very well for these smaller YouTube channels and gained them a bit of traction. And there have been other channels too that have made longer deep dive style videos or retrospective style videos going into the Angry Video Game Nerd and just kind of glossing over everything that's happened and why the show has gone downhill. And it's actually a little bit interesting in the sense that with someone like, say, Red Cow Arcade, you see these guys talking about how AVGN has just gone downhill lately, and then it's like, oh, these guys are pretty funny, like, what do they do? And then you see that they review boxed macaroni and cheese as their bread and butter content, so it does kind of make me wonder if, say, someone will watch this video who's never seen one of my videos before and be like, oh, look, this guy's talking negatively about the Angry Video Game Nerd. I wonder what his main content is. And they go to my channel and they're like, oh, he talks about and demonstrates old ceiling fans. How riveting. So it's just kind of interesting how if you dip your foot into another style of content and become popular in it, some people can be a little alienated when they see your main style of content. But anyways, getting back to the Angry Video Game Nerd. So at the end of 2021, a boiling point was reached. The plagiarism scandal, James was getting riffed on all over the internet for, his behind-the-scenes video that I talked about, as well as just the AVGN videos going downhill in general. So, starting in 2022, things changed. Rental reviews, the Cinemassacre podcast, all of the side videos that had the Screenwave people like Kieran, Justin, Tony, etc. in them, they all just stopped. And it was dialed back to where there was only 1 or 2 Angry Video Game Nerd episodes a month, and James was the only personality in them, as well as a couple other side people here and there that were not really... They weren't Screenwave people is the bottom line. Justin was kicked out of the Rex Viper band, which... That's kind of funny to think about, just like... Yeah, Justin, you're canned. You can't be on stage anymore. Even though, if I were to guess, I'd say he probably fired himself. Anyways, so basically the Screenwave people were brought out of the public eye entirely, and the channel, it went through a bit of a return to form, you could say. The number of AVGN episodes per year dialed back from like 12 to 14 down to only 6. And there were other videos as well. So it seemed like they were kind of getting their bearings back. It was kind of a return to form. And while the AVGN episodes in 2022 weren't amazing spectacles by any means, they were definitely an improvement over the AVGN episodes that have been coming out for the last couple years. And once again, the Screenwave people at this point were nowhere to be seen. Now, I believe the reason for this is because while James probably doesn't look at the Cinemassacre Truth that much, it has been confirmed that Screenwave people, probably Justin in particularly, they obsessively read the Cinemassacre Truth. And I feel like Justin was the guy who maybe took a step back and realized, like, this isn't working, we need to make some changes here. I wouldn't be surprised if James had a hand in the changes too, but Justin may have been the guy to read the truth and just see that things were falling apart and that changes needed to be made. And how this was confirmed, that Screenwave obsessively reads the Cinemassacre Truth, is that in early 2023, Kieran, who was the main editor starting around 2017 or 18, he quit Screenwave, and since then has gone on live stream a couple of times ranting about all of the horrible mismanagement of Screenwave, and it's kind of been like an inside look as he's been able to spill some pretty juicy tidbits at how Screenwave operated and how they just kind of screwed over AVGN and just all that stuff. And he would say that Screenwave would obsessively read the Cinemassacre Truth. He talked about how the 200th episode, with it being 3 parts, they had to split it into 3 parts because they sold too many brand deals and they didn't tell James about it. And that's something I didn't bring up yet, and it actually relates back to the joke at the start of this episode, is that now every single AVGN episode starts with like a brand deal or a sponsorship where it's not James and the nerd character immediately jumping into the game. It's James usually in his like Mortal Kombat hat, like talking about whatever the sponsor is, ExpressVPN, Raycon earbuds, Soylent, the most recent one that everyone's making fun of. So that's a little jarring, especially considering James's style of usually not really being much of a sellout. But anyway, so Kieran has talked about many inside tidbits from Screenwave and kind of exposed them in a sense, and the Cinemassacre Truth has eaten this up, just seeing it as a new way to get resources and kind of like document all the missteps that Screenwave has taken in kind of screwing up AVGN. And even though here in 2023, the Angry Video Game Nerd's definitely not as bad as it was in like 2020, 2021. That, I think, was still the lowest point. It still has kind of stagnated, Like, they found someone to replace Kieran, and you can still tell the humor and editing style is rather off. And the upload uptick has increased as of late. Like, they're releasing James and John videos, which, is a new buddy of James that they've been having on lately. And I think he's a pretty good personality, So currently it's just kind of stagnant, and where it will go from here, who knows? I feel like it's just going to stay where it is for the most part, and there may be some upticks and some downticks in the future, but for the most part, I feel like it's just going to stay where it is. So, but with all that said, even though James may be in a bit of a creative slump now and has been for quite a long time, what he did and how he revolutionized the online video world as a whole can never ever be oversighted. So even though everybody, or not everybody, but even though a decent portion of his fan base from back in the day does just like to riff on him and constantly make fun of him nowadays for everything he does in his videos, for having no time to do anything or whatever, at the end of the day, they're all big fans. We're all big fans, and we all have James to thank for creating the online video world as it is today, as without him we wouldn't have Nostalgia Critic, JonTron, or so many others. So that just about wraps up my thoughts on the Angry Video Game Nerd and Cinemassacre in its current state and how it's just kind of gone downhill. I mostly talked about the series objectively here. However, I do agree with the majority consensus that, you know, the videos just aren't as good as they used to be. It's rather interesting to look on the Cinemassacre truth to find out about these controversies. It was very interesting listening to Kieran talk about his experience with Screenwave and all the shady stuff that they had done. So it's been an interesting ride. That's where I'll leave it at. So I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.